Disclaimer: this story is based on real-life experiences shared for storytelling purposes. Names and some details have been changed to protect the privacy of individuals involved. Viewer discretion is advised. It was one of those evenings where the sky suddenly turned gray and the wind picked up out of nowhere. I had just come home from work, tossed my bag on the couch, and was about to change into something comfortable when I heard the first crack of thunder. Within minutes, the rain started pounding the windows like someone urgently knocking at the door. I remember standing by the kitchen window, watching the rain flood the street, thinking how unpredictable the weather had become lately. That's when I noticed him, my neighbor's son, standing just outside the gate. He looked maybe 15 or 16, soaked head to toe, hugging himself like he was freezing. I hesitated for a second. We weren't exactly close with our neighbors. We exchanged the usual hellos and polite smiles, but never really went beyond that. Their son was always quiet, a little too quiet, actually. He rarely made eye contact, and something about his silence always made me curious. Still, seeing him out there in the cold, shivering, brought out the instinct in me. I quickly opened the door and called out, "Hey, you all right? Come in before you catch a cold." He looked up, surprised, as if he didn't expect anyone to notice him. Without saying a word, he stepped inside, water dripping from his clothes onto the hallway floor. I handed him a towel and pointed to the guest bathroom so he could dry off. He nodded, barely meeting my gaze, and disappeared down the hall. It all felt normal, kind, neighborly. Nothing more. But something about the way he looked around my house, how cautiously he moved, made me feel uneasy. Not scared, exactly, but aware. Like I needed to pay attention. When he returned from the bathroom, he was still quiet. I offered him a hot drink and he sat on the edge of the couch, still avoiding eye contact. I tried asking a few casual questions. Were your parents home? What were you doing outside in this storm? But his answers were short, almost rehearsed. As I handed him a mug of warm tea, I couldn't help but notice the faint bruises on his wrist. They looked old but hadn't fully healed. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I kept quiet. Maybe he fell, maybe it was nothing. But it didn't sit right with me. The atmosphere in the room felt heavy, even with the sound of the rain in the background. An hour passed. He hadn't asked to leave, and I didn't feel right asking him to go either. I offered him dinner, and after a bit of hesitation, he accepted. We ate mostly in silence, but something had shifted. He was starting to relax, just a little. He even smiled once, faint but genuine. I noticed it immediately. It was like watching someone who hadn't smiled in a long time suddenly remember how. And just when I thought the evening was finally winding down, he looked up and said something that completely caught me off guard. "Can I ask you something? Just promise you won't tell anyone." His voice was low but steady. That question, so simple, yet so loaded, hung in the air between us. I nodded slowly, unsure what I was agreeing to, but knowing this moment was more important than it seemed. He glanced toward the window as if making sure no one was outside, then leaned in slightly and whispered something that sent chills down my spine. I didn't know how to respond. It wasn't something I was expecting, not from a quiet, polite neighbor's son. And it definitely wasn't something I could ignore. In that moment, the entire night shifted. The rain outside kept falling, steady and loud, like it was trying to drown out whatever truth had just been spoken. But it was too late. I had already heard it, and now nothing was going to be the same again. What he told me that night opened a door to something far deeper, far more complicated than I ever imagined. A simple act of kindness, letting someone in from the rain, had now turned into something I couldn't walk away from. But the real question was, what was I going to do next? Stay tuned. I sat there frozen, still holding my half-empty cup of tea, while his words echoed in my mind. I didn't say anything right away. I think part of me was still processing, and another part just didn't know what to say. He looked at me, waiting, like he was used to being dismissed. Maybe even ready for it. But I didn't. I just gave him a small nod, and something about that made his shoulders drop, like he could breathe for the first time in a while. The storm outside showed no signs of stopping, and somehow it matched what I felt building inside. I offered him a blanket and said, "You can stay here tonight if you want." He looked surprised again, like kindness was something he didn't expect from people. He didn't answer right away, but eventually gave a small nod. It was quiet after that, but not awkward, more like both of us were thinking about everything that had just been said, without needing to speak it out loud again. After he went to bed in the guest room, I stayed up. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about his words, about the bruises, about why he didn't just go home, even after the rain started. I realized I barely knew anything about this boy. I had seen him around for over a year, passing by our gate, sometimes walking the dog, mostly alone. His parents seemed polite enough. His dad always wore a serious expression, and his mom rarely made eye contact. They weren't rude, but something about their family felt closed off, like they kept the world at arm's length. The next morning, when I walked past the guest room, the door was still closed. I knocked lightly and said, "Hey, it's morning. You hungry?" There was silence for a second, then his voice soft, "Yeah, I'll be out in a minute." When he came out, he looked different, less tense, but also like he'd been up all night too. We sat across from each other at the breakfast table. He poked at his toast more than he ate it. He finally started talking a little more. He told me his name again, as if I didn't already know. Told me a bit about school, how he didn't have many friends. Said he liked to draw, but he always kept his sketchbook hidden. I asked why, and he just shrugged. Said it didn't matter, but I could tell it did. Then he paused, looked up at me, and asked, "Do you think some people are just invisible?" That question sat heavy in the air. I didn't know how to answer it honestly, but I said, "I think some people feel invisible. But they're not. Sometimes the people around them just don't know how to see properly." He didn't reply, but he gave the faintest smile. Not happy, exactly. Just seen. I wanted to ask more, but I didn't want to push him too far. I didn't want to scare him off. I just kept the conversation easy, kept the space open. I told him he could stay until the rain let up, or until he felt like going home. He didn't answer right away. Eventually, he said he'd like to stay for a little while longer. I tried to act normal, but inside, I was unsettled. What had really happened in his house? What did his silence mean? Why did he trust me with something so sensitive when we barely knew each other? That afternoon, while he was in the other room, I noticed something on the floor near the couch. It was a small sketchbook, worn at the corners. I didn't mean to look, but curiosity got the better of me. The pages were filled with drawings, detailed, emotional, raw. Some showed scenes that looked like memories. Others had shadows and figures that gave off a sense of fear or loneliness. There was one drawing that caught my attention, a figure curled up in a corner and another standing tall nearby, looming. No faces, just outlines. But the message was loud and clear. I closed the book and set it back where I found it, pretending I hadn't seen it. When he came back into the room, I just smiled and asked if he wanted to watch something. He nodded. We didn't talk about the sketchbook. Not yet. But now, more than ever, I felt the story wasn't just about letting someone inside to escape the rain. It was about what happens when someone finally steps out of silence, even if just for a moment. And what you do with that moment, how you choose to respond, can change everything. Still, one thing was clear. Whatever this boy had been through, it wasn't over. And something inside me knew that the real story was just beginning. The next few days passed in a strange rhythm. He stayed at my place longer than I thought he would. I told myself it was just until things settled, until he was ready to go home. But every time I brought up the idea, even gently, I saw the shift in his face. His jaw would tighten, and his eyes would flick toward the floor. That reaction said more than words ever could. So I stopped asking. I tried to create a space that felt calm, normal. We cooked simple meals together. He offered to help with small things, folding laundry, feeding my cat, even washing dishes without me asking. It wasn't about being useful. It felt like he needed something to focus on, to stay grounded. I started to learn more about him in these quiet, everyday moments. His favorite color was green. He didn't like loud noises. He flinched slightly if anyone raised their voice, even in a movie. And every night, he double-checked the locks on the front door before going to bed. One evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, he asked me, "Do you think people can really change?" The way he said it didn't sound like a casual question. I asked, "Why do you ask?" He paused, then shrugged like it didn't matter. "Just wondering. Some people say they're sorry, but they keep doing the same thing." There was something so worn out in his tone, like someone older than his years. It broke my heart a little more each day. The conflict wasn't just between him and his family, it was inside him. I could see it. He was carrying something heavy, and every day it showed in the way he moved, the way he avoided mirrors, the way he never sat with his back to the door. He still hadn't told me exactly what had happened, but I was starting to piece things together without him saying much. And what I was sensing, what was slowly forming in my mind, wasn't easy to accept. I couldn't stop thinking about his parents. I started watching them from a distance whenever I saw them outside. They acted like everything was normal. His father still washed the car on Sundays. His mother still trimmed the hedges and smiled politely at neighbors. But their son was missing, and no one had knocked on my door. No one had asked about him. Not once. That fact alone spoke volumes. One morning, while he was still asleep, I saw his mother standing at their gate. She was on the phone, pacing slowly, her voice calm. She didn't look worried. She didn't look like a mother who'd lost track of her child for 4 days. I wanted to walk over and ask, to say something, but I didn't. I didn't know how, and honestly, I was afraid of what might happen if I did. Later that day, I brought it up carefully. "Have your parents called you?" He didn't answer right away. Just kept staring at the TV. I waited. Finally, he said, "They won't. Not unless they need something." I didn't push further. I knew what he meant, even if I didn't have all the details. That night, as I was picking up a blanket from the couch, I noticed another page sticking out of his sketchbook. This one was different. It was newer, rough, not fully shaded. It showed a house, my house. And inside, a small figure curled up on a couch and another one beside them, offering a cup of tea. Outside the window, shadows hovered. It was drawn in silence, but it said everything. He was afraid of what was outside. But inside, maybe for the first time, he felt safe. And that was the problem. Because the longer he stayed, the clearer it became that going back wasn't safe for him. And I was now caught in the middle of something deeper than I'd expected. It wasn't just a storm he was hiding from that night. It was a life he couldn't face. And now, without realizing it, I had become part of his escape. But how long could this go on before someone came looking? Before someone started asking questions I wasn't ready to answer? And more importantly, was I really helping him or just delaying the inevitable? The turning point came on the 6th night. It started like the others, quiet, still, and uneasy beneath the surface. We'd just finished dinner, and he was sitting by the window, watching the rain tap gently against the glass. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter, trying to ignore the feeling that something was building. I could sense it in him too. He hadn't spoken much all day, and there was a strange tightness in the air, like the moment before a thunderclap. He turned suddenly and asked, "What if someone shows up here? What would you do?" His voice was low, almost shaky, like he was bracing for the answer. I looked up at him, unsure how to respond. I wanted to say I'd protect him, that nothing would happen, but something in his eyes told me he needed more than soft words. Before I could answer, there was a loud knock at the door. He froze. I froze. The knock came again, 3 sharp, deliberate hits. Not the kind of knock that says neighbor or delivery. The kind that says I know you're in there. My heart started racing. He stood up slowly, backing away from the door, panic rising in his chest. I walked over quietly and peeked through the peephole. It was his father. So calm, so composed, standing in the rain like he had all the time in the world. I didn't open the door. I turned and looked at the boy, whose face had gone completely pale. He shook his head slowly, lips pressed tight. "Please," he whispered, "don't let him in." His voice cracked, filled with something deeper than fear. Something like desperation. His father knocked again, louder this time. Then he spoke, his voice muffled through the door. "I know he's in there. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." The words weren't angry, but there was something cold behind them. Controlled. Practiced. I stepped back from the door, torn between what was right and what was safe. I could feel the weight of it. This moment was no longer just about shelter or kindness. It was about protection, about trust. And any choice I made from here on out could change both our lives. Outside, the rain poured harder. Inside, everything was about to break. I stood frozen, staring at the door, the echo of his father's voice still ringing in my ears. Behind me, the boy's breathing had quickened, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. My instincts screamed to keep the door shut, but my mind spun with doubt. What if I was wrong? What if this had all been some misunderstanding I didn't fully grasp? But then, just as I was wrestling with those thoughts, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A message. Unknown number. "You don't know what he's capable of. Watch your back." I stared at it, feeling my skin go cold. My hands trembled as I turned to look at the boy. He hadn't moved, but he must have seen the look on my face. "What is it?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I showed him the message. His eyes widened, not in confusion, but recognition. "I think he knows someone sent that," he said quietly. "That's why he's here now." "What do you mean, someone?" I asked. But before he could answer, there was another knock this time, not from the front door. It came from the side entrance near the laundry room. We both turned toward the sound, stunned. Someone else was outside. My heart raced. 2 entrances. 2 unknowns. 2 threats? I didn't understand what was happening anymore. Was his father working with someone? Or was someone trying to warn us from the outside? The boy grabbed my arm. "We need to go. Now." "But go where?" I asked, panicking. "We don't even know who's out there." He looked at me with a sudden seriousness I hadn't seen before. "There's more going on than I told you. I didn't just run from home. I saw something. Something I wasn't supposed to. The walls felt like they were closing in. The danger wasn't just at the door anymore. It was all around us." We didn't have time to think. I grabbed my car keys, shoved on a jacket, and led him quietly out the back door. The rain was pouring, masking our footsteps as we slipped through the alley behind the house. My heart pounded, every shadow feeling like it might leap out at us. Just as we reached the car, a dark figure stepped into view under the street lamp, soaked, still, and watching us. It wasn't his father. The boy froze beside me. "That's the man from the basement," he whispered, voice shaking. "He doesn't live with us, but he's been there." In that moment, everything clicked. The bruises, the silence, the sketch of a looming figure. He hadn't just run away from home, he had escaped something much darker. I didn't ask questions. I pushed him into the car, locked the doors, and sped off. I didn't know where we were going, only that we had to get far away. The figure didn't chase us, but the image of him standing there, emotionless in the rain, burned itself into my mind. We drove straight to the police station. I stayed with the boy as he finally told them everything. His father hadn't acted alone. There had been others. Things had happened in that house, things he had seen, even documented in his drawings, that could no longer be ignored. The investigation moved quickly after that. His father was taken in. The other man disappeared before they could catch him. But weeks later, I found something slipped under my door. A small drawing, the boy and I standing at the gate, side by side. And in the corner, barely visible, the same shadowed figure, still watching from a distance. He might have escaped the house. But the past wasn't done with him yet. The weeks that followed were quiet, but not empty. The boy was placed in temporary care while the investigation continued, and I stayed in touch, visiting often. He was finally getting support, real, consistent care from people trained to help. He started therapy, began opening up more, and even entered an art program where he could express what he'd been holding in for so long. The difference in him was slow but visible. He smiled more. He asked questions. He began to trust. I often thought about the night he first knocked on my door, drenched in rain, carrying more than just soaked clothes. Letting him in wasn't just a gesture of kindness. It became the moment that unraveled secrets, revealed a hidden truth, and saved a life. And in a way, it changed mine too. I had never expected to be pulled into someone else's storm, but once I was, walking away wasn't an option. The man who had been watching that night was never found. But the authorities remained alert, and safety plans were put in place. Still, that single drawing he left under my door reminded me that healing doesn't always mean closure, and sometimes the past lingers even when it's behind you. But he was no longer running. That was the difference. Sometimes it only takes one open door to stop a cycle. And maybe on that rainy night, that open door was exactly what he needed most. Because what started with shelter from a storm became the beginning of a second chance.